Ethan Parker thought he was just taking a quiet walk in the snowy woods with Ranger, his loyal German shepherd. But everything changed when Ranger suddenly stopped and growled into the dark. A blood trail cut across the snow. Seconds later, two terrified dogs staggered forward, chains broken, collapsing at Ethan's feet. Ranger led the way to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Silverwood storage. Everyone believed it had been empty for years. But inside, dozens of dogs cried from metal cages, trapped in a nightmare no one knew existed. Ethan looked at Ranger. The old canine's eyes said everything. God had brought them here for a reason. Tonight, they were not just walking, they were saving lives. Stay with us. Hope is coming. A cold twilight draped over Willow Creek, Colorado, where snow and silence shared the same breath. Ethan Parker walked along the narrow forest trail with the steady pace of a man who no longer rushed toward anything. He was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands marked by old burns and pale scars, badges from his years as a firefighter before a collapsing roof ended his career. His beard, once chestnut, now threaded with tired gray, framed a face that rarely smiled. Ethan's eyes, a storm-washed blue, carried a lingering sorrow he hid behind a rough but gentle calm. At his side padded the loyal shadow of his days, Ranger, a German shepherd of 10 years. Ranger was large, his sable fur dusted with white near his muzzle, a sign of age and battles survived. His left ear had a slight fold at the tip from an old training accident, and his back leg bore a faint scar from a metal shard long forgotten. But his stride remained purposeful, protective, a soldier in retirement, always scanning, always ready. Ethan exhaled into the crisp night, watching his breath twist into the wind like a fading promise. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of boots and paws in snow. It was peaceful, yet his chest tightened as memories tried to claw free, flames roaring, a teammate's scream cut short, the moment he was pulled away from a burning world that still followed him. He shook his head, grounding himself in the cold present. Ranger suddenly stopped. His entire body stiffened, muscles tightening under his thick coat. His nose lowered to the snow, inhaling sharply. A low growl vibrated through him. Ethan frowned, crouching. "What is it, buddy?" The answer glinted back at him. Tiny stains of red against the endless white. Drops of blood, scattered like punctuation in a silent warning. Ethan's pulse jumped. The stains continued ahead in small, irregular intervals, not enough to mark a deadly wound, but certainly enough to signal distress. Ranger tugged on the leash, whimpering with urgency. Ethan hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. "Lead the way." Snow swirled around them as they followed the trail deeper into the industrial outskirts of Willow Creek, an area of warehouses and shuttered facilities long abandoned after the logging industry collapsed. The towering silhouettes of decaying metal structures loomed like ghosts of old labor. Ranger's pace quickened. Ethan's mind spun. Blood meant someone, or something, was hurt. He felt that older instinct rise within him, the one trained to run toward danger, not away. Still, he was no hero anymore. At least he told himself he wasn't. The blood trail led them behind a rusted chain-link fence, through gaps where vines had claimed territory, and toward a forgotten parking lot cracked by frost. Ranger emitted a sharp bark and sprinted forward. Against a dented dumpster, curled in fear, lay a tiny shape shivering violently. A small white dog, no more than a year old, a Maltese with matted fur and big terrified eyes, Its back paw was slashed open, fresh blood staining the snow. Ethan knelt, slow and gentle. "Hey there, sweetheart." The dog growled weakly, more fear than threat. Ranger approached, and with a soft whine, nudged his nose toward the pup, as if speaking in a language Ethan couldn't understand. The tiny dog relaxed just a little. Ethan lifted it with practiced care. Its bones felt fragile like dry twigs. "Somebody did this to you," he murmured, voice darkening. Hanging from the pup's collar was a small silver tag, stamped with a worn-off emblem, a cartoon dog face and faded letters from a brand he recognized. Pet Meal Factory Company, a pet food company that had shut down years ago after rumors of contamination scandals. Ethan frowned deeper. Ranger sniffed the air again, posture alert, ears flicking toward the distant, hulking shape of the abandoned factory building ahead. The dark windows gaped like broken teeth. As the wind blew, Ethan heard it. A faint sound beneath the howl of the cold. Not wind, not metal shifting. Something alive. A muffled yelp. Then another. Ranger growled, fur bristling. Ethan's heartbeat hammered. The pup in his arms trembled harder, burying its face into his jacket as if begging, pleading for protection. From what? Ethan didn't know. But dread gathered like smoke inside him. "Come on," he whispered to Ranger. "We need to get her help." Turning away from the factory, he walked back toward civilization, glancing over his shoulder more times than he cared to admit. Ranger kept close, but his eyes remained fixed on that building, as if memorizing a future enemy. They reached Ethan's old pickup truck. He wrapped the injured pup in a flannel blanket and gently placed her on the passenger seat. Ranger jumped in beside her, watching her carefully. As Ethan started the engine, a shiver ran down his spine. Not from cold, but from the sickening realization that the whimpers he'd heard weren't from just one dog. Someone was using that factory, and someone, or many, were suffering inside it. He gripped the steering wheel. For the first time in years, he felt the old fire in his chest, the urge to fight for someone helpless, even if that fight might reopen wounds he had tried so hard to bury. Ranger pressed his head against Ethan's shoulder, warm and grounding. Ethan nodded, whispering a promise meant for both of them. "We'll come back. No one is left behind." He didn't know it yet, but the blood on the snow was only the first cry for help, and Ranger had already answered the call. The first rays of dawn crept over Willow Creek, brushing the snow-covered roofs with a pale golden blush. Ethan Parker drove fast toward the local veterinary clinic, heart still pounding from what he and Ranger had discovered near the abandoned pet meal factory. Ranger lay alert in the passenger seat, sitting protectively beside the small Maltese, her tiny head resting against his warm fur. The pup's trembling slowed, as if Ranger's presence alone promised safety. The clinic was a modest brick building on the corner of Maple Avenue. A wooden sign read, "Reed's Veterinary Care," its letters hand-painted but proud. The bell above the door chimed as Ethan rushed in, carrying the pup wrapped in his flannel blanket. Dr. Lucas Reed looked up from the reception counter. He was a man in his early 50s, stocky with a gentle round face, brown hair sprinkled with silver, and glasses that constantly slid down his nose. He always wore light green scrubs covered in tiny paw prints, a cheerful pattern that clashed with the permanent crease of worry between his brows. Despite being soft-spoken, Lucas had a quiet determination rooted in decades of treating animals, no matter the hour or cost. "What happened?" Lucas hurried forward, eyes widening at the sight of blood. Found her outside the old factory, Ethan said, forcing calm into his voice. She's hurt. Someone did this. Lucas examined the wound quickly and nodded. Give me 15 minutes. She's lucky you found her. As Lucas disappeared into the back room with the pup, Ranger paced circles, nails tapping anxiously on the clinic floor. Ethan tried to steady his breathing. The memory of the muffled whimpers inside that factory gnawed at him relentlessly. Moments later, the clinic door swung open again. Officer Emily Carter stepped in, her boots leaving melted snow on the mat. She was in her late 20s, tall and athletic with curly black hair tied into a low ponytail. Her hazel eyes were sharp yet warm, framed by freckles across her cheeks. Emily carried an air of stubborn optimism, the kind that refused to surrender even when no one else believed. She had moved to Willow Creek only a year ago, hoping to serve a community where she could make a difference. A dream often met with town gossip and skeptical senior officers who thought her too idealistic, too young to understand how things really worked. But Emily wasn't easily discouraged. "Morning," she greeted, catching her breath. "Dispatch told me you called. You found a dog?" "Not just a dog," Ethan replied. "Something's very wrong over there at that factory." Emily crossed her arms. "You mentioned hearing other animals." Ethan nodded, jaw tightening. "A lot of them." Ranger stopped pacing and stood at attention, ears pointed toward the exam room. Emily's gaze softened as she crouched and rubbed Ranger's neck. "You're the real hero here, huh?" Ranger gave a quiet huff, as if accepting the compliment with professional modesty. Lucas soon returned. "The pup is stable for now. Minor blood loss, but nothing critical." He placed the small dog gently onto a cushion beside Ranger. "She'll need rest, and probably her owner." Emily checked the tag again. "Bella? We'll file a report. Maybe someone is missing her." But her tone betrayed doubt. Too many dogs had vanished lately. Lucas cleared his throat hesitantly. "This isn't the first case like this. Over the past months, I've treated dogs with strange injuries, restraints, chemical smells, signs of malnutrition." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Why didn't you report it?" Lucas looked ashamed. "I did, but the reports disappeared, and an officer told me animals wander and get hurt, like I was overreacting." Emily stood straighter, anger flashing in her eyes. "Not anymore. We'll get to the bottom of this." She turned to Ethan. "Show me exactly where you found her tonight." Within minutes, the three of them were back in Ethan's truck. Ethan driving, Emily navigating, Ranger sitting upright like a co-pilot on high alert. The wind cut through the forest as they approached the industrial district again. Ethan parked far from view. The factory loomed ahead. Dark, silent, predatory. Emily clicked on her flashlight, her voice low but steady. "Follow me. Keep quiet." As they circled the building, Ranger suddenly froze. His ears flicked and his nose lifted into the air. He let out a low growl that resonated with danger. Emily caught the sound too, a faint metallic clatter from inside the warehouse. Then a sudden bark, sharp, panicked, followed by another and another, layered in rising desperation. Emily's grip tightened on her flashlight. "There are definitely animals in there." Ethan's pulse spiked. The déjà vu of tragedy pressed heavily against his ribs. Images of flames, trapped screams. Only this time the victims couldn't shout for help in words. Ranger crept toward a broken air vent near the loading dock. He sniffed deeply, and then recoiled with a distressed whine. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. Ranger looked up at him, eyes wide, pleading, as if begging them to do something, anything. Inside, another sound echoed, not a bark, not a chain, a human voice, rough, commanding. "Make sure that shipment is ready. We move tonight." Emily sharply inhaled. Shipment? Ethan felt coldness slash through him more brutally than any winter wind. Dogs weren't being held here to be rescued. They were merchandise. Emily signaled for them to retreat. "We need backup. A warrant. This is bigger than we thought." Reluctantly, they slipped away from the factory shadows. Ethan placed a steadying hand on Ranger's back as they headed to the truck. His voice was barely a whisper, yet filled with a fire he believed he had buried forever. "We're coming back, no matter who or what stands in the way." Ranger pressed against, his leg determined. Ethan looked toward the town lights in the distance. Willow Creek had no idea what darkness lurked at its edge. But the truth was no longer asleep, and neither was he. The evening shadows grew long across Willow Creek, as the tension from the factory visit lingered in the air like frost that refused to melt. Ethan Parker stood in his small kitchen, staring blankly at the steaming kettle while his mind replayed the desperate barking and the chilling order they overheard. A shipment. Tonight. Ranger sat by the door, restless, glancing between Ethan and the darkness outside as though he feared time itself was slipping away. Bella, the tiny Maltese, slept curled on a makeshift bed of folded towels, her bandaged paw twitching in dreams Ethan hoped weren't just memories of fear. Ethan's home was modest, a converted mountain cabin with wooden beams and mismatched furniture, warmed by a crackling fireplace. He once planned to renovate, to fill this place with laughter and friends, until the fire ended those dreams and left silence in their place. Now the silence only heightened his dread. A sudden knock broke the stillness. Ranger barked once, low but alert. When Ethan opened the door, Sheriff Raymond Doyle stepped inside, brushing snow from his black leather jacket. Doyle was a broad man in his late 40s, with a square jaw dotted by dark stubble and stern blue eyes that rarely revealed what he was thinking. He carried the rigid posture of someone who believed emotions were weaknesses best hidden. Years ago, he had been Ethan's friend, sharing beers and fishing trips, before the fire took Ethan's crew and left him breathing. Guilt had driven them apart. "Officer Carter called me," Doyle said, voice gravelly. "Said you think the old pet meal factory is active again." Ethan nodded. "We heard dogs inside. A man ordering a shipment." Doyle exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "Someone's been stealing dogs for months, sure. But a trafficking ring? In this town?" His doubt scraped against Ethan like sandpaper. Ranger bristled beside him, sensing the sheriff's skepticism. Ethan fought the urge to snap. "You don't have to believe me, but at least check it out." Doyle rubbed his forehead, struggling between disbelief and duty. Before he could answer, Emily Carter arrived, cheeks flushed from cold and urgency. She carried a stack of files and her duty belt hung slightly loose as she rushed. "Sheriff, please," Emily urged, placing the files on the table. "Missing dog reports, all from neighborhoods around the factory. The patterns line up." Doyle flipped through the paperwork, his expression slowly hardening. "This is more than coincidence." Ethan leaned forward. "We can't wait. They're moving the dogs tonight." Doyle hesitated, a long, heavy pause, before grabbing the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, get a unit ready. We're investigating the factory." Relief swept Ethan, but Ranger still stared out the window, ears perked, as though anticipating trouble already closing in. Minutes later, they assembled near the dark silhouette of the factory. 2 patrol officers joined them. Officer Daniel Brooks, a slim man in his early 30s with sandy hair and a nervous habit of tapping his badge when stressed, and Officer Marissa King, a tall, athletic woman with sharp cheekbones and short platinum blonde hair, known for being fearless on duty and sarcastic off-duty. Doyle split them into positions. Carter and King take the rear entrance. Brooks and I go through the main gate. Parker, he sighed, reluctantly accepting what Ethan brought to the table. You and that dog of yours stick close to me. Ethan nodded, placing a hand on Ranger's back. The German shepherd moved with silent precision, guided by instincts sharpened over years of service. The factory loomed like a rusted monster. When Doyle cut the padlock, the gate groaned open, echoing across the frozen lot. Inside, the smell hit first. Urine, fear, metal, and chemicals tangled into a stench of captivity. Then the sounds: whimpers, claws scraping against cages, muffled cries that stabbed into Ethan's chest. Ranger tensed and pointed with his nose toward a lower corridor. Ethan followed, flashlight carving the darkness aside. They found rows of cages stacked 2 levels high, each holding frightened dogs: retrievers, huskies, mutts, puppies too small to stand. Their eyes glimmered with desperation and hope mingling in one trembling gaze. "We'll get you out," Ethan whispered, voice cracking. Doyle clenched his jaw as the weight of reality crushed his earlier doubt. "Radio in, we—" Movement sliced through the shadows. Ranger barked fiercely as a figure burst from behind a metal crate. A man with a shaved head, long beard, and wild eyes. He swung a metal pipe, missing Doyle by inches. Doyle tackled him, the pipe clanging across the concrete floor. Brooks rushed to help, adrenaline making his hands shake. Emily's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got runners at the back. 3 individuals heading into the trees." King added, strained and breathless, "They're armed!" The man on the floor cursed violently, kicking, spitting hatred. Ethan noticed a tattoo on his forearm, a snarling wolf over a barcode. Not a drifter, someone belonging to something bigger. The factory lights suddenly blazed to life, flooding the warehouse in harsh yellow. More men came charging from a stairwell. Ranger lunged forward, teeth bared and eyes burning with instinctive courage. "Ethan, get back!" Doyle roared. But Ethan wasn't leaving, not with cages full of lives counting on them. The dogs erupted into frantic barking, their voices merging into a roar of fear and hope. Ethan braced himself beside Ranger, the world narrowing to the fight and the promise he had made. No one is left behind. And as chaos exploded around them, he knew one thing: he was no longer just discovering the darkness. He was now standing in its heart. Screams, barks, and metal clashing collided inside the factory like a nightmare orchestra. Ethan Parker pressed his back against a row of cages, his breath sharp and uneven. Ranger stood in front of him, muscles coiled, growling at the shadows where more attackers could be lurking. Sheriff Doyle and Officer Brooks wrestled to restrain the bearded guard, handcuffs clicking shut as the man spat curses, promising this wasn't the end. Ethan could feel it too. The end was much further away. Ethan scanned the room. The terrified eyes of the caged dogs glimmered like scattered stars in a sky of fear. Some barked with desperation. Others whimpered so softly they seemed to be disappearing into themselves. Fury rose in Ethan like flame-fed oxygen. He wanted to rip every lock from every door, save them all now, but danger pressed in from every direction. A sudden blast echoed from the far end of the warehouse, Officer Marissa King's voice shouted through the radio. "We're taking fire! They're escaping into the woods!" The rear exit rattled violently. Emily Carter burst in, cheeks streaked with dust and snow, her hazel eyes blazing with adrenaline and frustration. "They've got vehicles waiting beyond the tree line," she panted. "They're moving the main load." Doyle cursed beneath his breath. This place was just a holding site. Ethan clenched his fists, heat burning behind his eyes. They planned to clear out before anyone caught them. "We need evidence," Emily insisted. "Enough to shut this down across the state." Brooks nodded, still shaken. "And what about these dogs?" They didn't have enough crates, manpower, or time. One wrong move, and their rescue turned into a massacre. A metallic snap sounded above them. Ranger's head whipped upward just as a figure dropped from a catwalk, slamming into Doyle and sending him to the ground. This man was younger than the first guard, built like a linebacker, with a tattooed skull on his shaved scalp and dark eyes full of contempt. He swung a wrench at Ethan. Ranger lunged faster, grabbing the man's forearm and twisting him off balance. The wrench clattered away. Ethan tackled the man down, instinct taking over, his firefighter-trained strength meeting pure panic-fueled fury. Doyle groaned and pulled himself upright as Emily cuffed the attacker. Brooks helped him stand, worry softening his features. Doyle brushed him off. "I'm fine. Focus." Ranger, still alert, sniffed the air and took a few steps toward the stairwell where the attacker had come from. Then he froze, ears up, nose twitching sharply. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What is it, boy?" Ranger barked once, bolting up the metal stairs. Ethan followed with Emily close behind. The stairwell spiraled into an upper office space bathed in flickering fluorescent light. A worn-out metal desk sat beneath a cracked window. Papers, shipping manifests, and cash-filled envelopes littered the surface. But that wasn't what stole Ethan's breath. A cage in the corner rattled. Inside was a small German Shepherd puppy, barely 3 months old, trembling but determined not to cry. One floppy ear and one perked up, too familiar. "A K9 breed," Emily muttered. Ethan reached for the latch. "Probably taken from a training unit or bought to be reassigned." His voice thickened with disgust. The puppy's eyes were hauntingly bright. Wild, confused, but trusting. Ranger approached slowly, lowering his head to nuzzle the pup through the bars. The little one squeaked, a plea, a hope, then pressed his tiny body against Ranger's muzzle. Emily looked away for a moment, blinking rapidly. "We'll get him out." Ethan freed the puppy and carefully cradled him to his chest. The pup's heartbeat fluttered against his ribs like tiny wings. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. Not yet. Downstairs, more sirens wailed, backup arriving at last. Officers rushed into the building, documenting and securing the crime scene. Dogs were being loaded into rescue vans. But Doyle's voice cut through the chaos. "Half the cages are empty. They've already taken most of the shipment." Ethan's stomach sank. Ranger stiffened, staring toward the back door with a low, rumbling growl. The enemy was slipping away with dozens, maybe hundreds, of stolen lives. Emily stormed up beside them, face hardened with resolve. "We're not stopping here. Tomorrow morning we go after them." Ethan looked at the puppy, now sleeping against his chest, and then at Ranger, his loyal companion, whose eyes burned with the same truth. They couldn't turn back. The fight had just begun. Doyle's radio crackled. "Search teams on the perimeter, no sightings yet." Ethan knew what that meant. they were already gone. The darkness outside swallowed their tracks, leaving behind a warehouse of survivors and a trail of cruelty that stretched far beyond Willow Creek. Ethan tightened his grip on the puppy and placed his palm over Ranger's strong back. "We'll hunt them," he vowed. The dogs barked, no longer in fear, but in chorus with his promise. Snow fell heavier the next morning, blanketing Willow Creek in a cold hush that felt too peaceful for what lurked beneath. Ethan Parker stood outside the temporary animal shelter where the rescued dogs were being held, cradling the small German Shepherd puppy in his arms. He had spent the night awake in a sleepless vigil, one hand comforting the pup, the other gripping memories he wished could remain buried. Ranger pressed close to him, like a guardian of both past and present. Inside the shelter, volunteers worked tirelessly. Among them moved Sarah Whitmore, a woman in her early 60s with kind green eyes framed behind oval glasses. Her silver hair was tied into a loose bun, and her wool coat bore faded patches from rescue organizations she had served in younger days. Sarah was gentle and attentive, speaking to each frightened dog as though nothing bad had ever touched them. Her hands were steady, experienced. She had spent most of her life helping animals after losing her husband in a car accident decades ago. Love had filled the empty spaces grief left behind. She approached Ethan with a soft smile. "You look exhausted," she said, voice warm like a fireplace on a stormy night. "I'll rest when they're safe," Ethan replied, his tone firm but not unkind. Ranger nudged his leg as if agreeing. Sarah's eyes drifted to the pup in Ethan's arms. "He's a strong little soul. He'll be okay." Ethan nodded, though worry still clung to him like wet clothes. Emily Carter entered the shelter with her usual stride, determined but visibly anxious beneath it. Her uniform was wrinkled from a night with no sleep. She carried a paper cup of coffee in each hand and offered one to Ethan. "You'll need it," she said, forcing a tired smirk. "Thanks," Ethan replied, grateful more for her presence than the drink. Sheriff Doyle followed close behind, posture rigid. His eyes scanned the room with distrust, not toward the dogs, but toward the idea that his town could hide such ugliness. "We questioned the two men we caught," Doyle said. "They're small-time muscle. Paid to guard, don't know much." "But someone's giving orders," Emily stated. "Someone with money and connections." Brooks hurried in, nearly slipping on melted snow. He clutched a plastic evidence bag. "You'll want to see this." He handed it carefully to Emily. Inside was a folded document smudged with dirt, retrieved from the office upstairs before the raid ended. Emily unfolded it. Her eyes hardened. "It's a shipment schedule." Ethan leaned closer. The top line read, "Outgoing, 47 units," followed by a date just 3 days ahead. Units. His gut twisted. Names of locations followed, some crossed out, some circled. One location stood out. Silverwood Storage Yards, Bay E. "A distribution point," Doyle muttered, jaw clenching. Brooks pointed to the bottom. "There's a signature, VH. Emily's face paled. "Victor Hayes." Sarah gasped quietly. Everyone in Willow Creek knew that name. Hayes was a handsome man in his mid-40s with polished charm. Slick black hair, charcoal suits, a face always clean-shaven like a handsome TV host. He donated to charity, funded park renovations, sponsored adoption fairs for pets. He was the icon of kindness, the wolf hiding in a hero's skin. Doyle's fist tightened. "That snake." Emily inhaled sharply. "If Hayes is running this, He'll have lawyers ready before we can blink." "Then we hit him with everything," Ethan said. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Evidence, witnesses, and the dogs themselves." Ranger barked once. Agreement. Before they could strategize further, the shelter door swung open and a gust of snow blew in with Clara Jennings, a petite woman in her 50s wearing a puffy pink coat. Her tear-streaked face flushed with desperate hope. "My Luna!" she cried, spotting a golden retriever in one of the pens. The dog perked up instantly and wagged its tail, whining with joy. Clara rushed forward, dropping to her knees to embrace her. Ethan watched quietly as reunion replaced fear with love. The sight strengthened his resolve. Too many weren't so lucky yet. Emily looked at Ethan. "We go tonight. Storage yards." Doyle nodded. "We'll need to move carefully. Hayes has men who won't hesitate to put bullets in us." "And dogs at risk if we rush," Sarah added, her voice trembling. "Please, save them all." Ethan felt Ranger press against him again. The pup in his arms peeped a tiny whine, like he understood. Ethan's heart pounded. Hayes thought he was moving unnoticed in the dark. But now the dark had hunters. "We finish this," Ethan said, his breath steadying. "No more stolen lives." Snow tapped against the windows like a ticking clock. 3 days left. But Ethan wasn't waiting anymore. Tonight, they would strike. And this time, they weren't just saving dogs. They were bringing justice to Willow Creek. Night fell early, swallowing Willow Creek beneath a sky of iron-gray clouds. The roads leading toward the industrial district were nearly deserted, snow piled high along the sidewalks. Ethan Parker drove his truck with headlights dark, moving under shadows like a hunter who dared not disturb his prey. Ranger sat on the passenger seat, alert and silent. Beside Ethan, strapped in a small carrier designed by the shelter volunteers, rested the German Shepherd puppy. His ears twitched nervously every time the engine vibrated. Ethan placed a steady palm against the carrier, grounding them both. They parked 2 blocks away from Silverwood storage yards, a sprawling complex of metal warehouses and cargo bays, wrapped in chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. Tower lights cast long spears of white light across the icy asphalt. It looked abandoned, too quiet, too still, the kind of quiet that comes before something awful. Emily Carter crouched behind a dumpster, scanning the yard with binoculars. Her breaths puffed white, matching the intensity in her hazel eyes. Sheriff Doyle stood beside her, jaw set, a flashlight tucked into his belt, but turned off. Officer King was on the opposite end of the fence, checking corners with poised discipline. Officer Brooks moved like a nervous ghost behind them, fingers fidgeting near his holster. Ethan joined Emily. Ranger remained slightly ahead, nose lifting to read the air. A faint growl rumbled in his chest. Danger close. "See anything?" Ethan whispered. Emily shook her head. "Either they're late or they're ghosts." Doyle grunted. "Criminals don't miss paydays." Moments later, headlights glided silently through a side gate. A black cargo truck entered, followed by a matte gray pickup, the kind of vehicles chosen to vanish into the night. A man climbed out of the truck's cab, a tall figure with slick black hair, a charcoal coat hugging his fit frame. His polished shoes weren't made for dirt or cold. His face was clean-cut, charming even, but the smile he wore was empty like a hollowed-out fruit. Victor Hayes. Up close, he looked exactly like the photos in town newspaper articles. Charismatic philanthropist, beloved entrepreneur. But now his polished mask had cracks. His eyes were sharp, calculating, cruel, a wealthy predator moving in daylight among the innocent. Ethan's fists clenched. His pulse roared in his ears. Ranger stepped forward, muscles tensing. Emily whispered, "Wait for the signal." Hayes turned toward the back of his truck. Two burly men swung open the cargo doors. Inside, stacked crates rattled with movement. A whimper pierced the cold air. Hayes knocked on a crate, annoyed. "Keep them quiet," he snapped. One of his men, bald with a scar over one eyebrow, hit the metal cage with the butt of his pistol, eliciting a howl of pain. Ethan shifted to move, but Emily grabbed his arm. "Not yet," she mouthed. His eyes begged her to release him. Another figure approached from the pickup, a woman wrapped in a thick black trench coat. Her hairstyle, a sharp bob dyed copper red, gleamed under the lights. She had high cheekbones, thin lips, and pointed heels unsuited for snowy ground. Her name came easily as she started speaking. Lydia Marsh, a wealthy investor in Hayes's public animal charity, rumored patron of elite breeding programs. She was mid-40s, sharp-tongued, rumored ruthless in business. And here she was, smiling like a serpent wearing lipstick. "The buyers are waiting," Lydia said coolly. "We're late." Hayes clicked his tongue. "Had some unexpected visitors at the factory, but nothing we can't erase." Ethan's rage burned hotter than the factory fire from his memories. Helpless living things trapped, screaming. Not this time. Emily breathed deeply and gave the nod. "Now!" Doyle raised his voice. "Police, drop your weapons!" Flashlights burst alive. The lot erupted into chaos. Hayes's men spun around, guns drawn. Officer King took down one instantly with a swift shot to the shoulder. Ranger launched forward, teeth bared, tackling the scar-eyebrowed man before he could fire. The man toppled backward, shouting in terror as Ranger pinned him, muzzle pressed to his throat. Brooks tried to flank the truck, but another guard appeared from behind a crate, striking him down with a baton. Brooks collapsed, gasping. "Officer down!" King called out, rushing to cover him. Lydia ducked behind the pickup, shrieking orders to retreat. Hayes remained eerily calm, slipping something from his pocket. A remote. He pressed a button. The truck engine roared. The crate doors slammed shut. The vehicle lurched, ready to flee. "Stop that truck!" Emily yelled, sprinting toward the cab. The driver slammed the gas. Ethan didn't think. He moved. He grabbed onto the side of the cargo truck as it accelerated, Ranger still wrestling the guard behind him. Ethan tried to swing himself onto the platform, his boots slipping on the slick metal. The truck fishtailed onto the icy street, nearly throwing him off. Dogs barked inside, terrified. Ethan looked into the side mirror and met Hayes's gaze. Cold, amused. Hayes tapped the remote again. A deadbolt clanked. The back doors snapped fully shut. Ethan hung on with only one hand as the truck sped toward the highway. Wind slapped his face, his muscles screamed, but all he saw were the cages inside, lives that needed him. Ranger's howl echoed behind, rage, fear, loyalty. Ethan grit his teeth, fighting to pull himself up. The night swallowed them whole as the truck hurtled into the dark, dragging Ethan toward the heart of the dog-smuggling empire. The wind clawed at the windows of the patrol SUV as it sped down the icy highway. Sirens muted, but lights blazing in the darkness. In the vehicle ahead, Victor Hayes's cargo truck loaded with stolen dogs. Ethan Parker clung to the frame for dear life, fingers numb and lungs burning from cold and adrenaline. Ranger's distant howl still echoed in his bones. He had jumped onto a moving vehicle out of pure instinct, out of refusal to let innocent lives disappear again, just as fire had stolen the lives he once swore to protect. But this time, he was still fighting, alive, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, Sheriff Raymond Doyle's SUV took the lead in pursuit. Emily Carter leaned forward in the passenger seat, every muscle strained with fear for Ethan. "Faster, Ray," she demanded, gripping the dashboard. Doyle's jaw tightened, knuckles white around the wheel. "I'm already pushing it." In the back seat, Officer Marissa King loaded her rifle swiftly, her sharp, platinum-blonde hair glinting under the red-blue beacon. "We have one shot to stop that truck before it reaches the interstate. If they get through, we lose them." Officer Brooks stared through the window, fear and determination wrestling in his young blue eyes. He was still limping from the blow earlier, yet he leaned forward with the urgency of someone refusing to fail. "Ethan's up there. We have to get him off that thing." Up ahead, Ethan's boots slipped again. The truck fishtailed dangerously on the frozen road. He slammed his hand against the rear door, shouting through the metal, "Hang on! We're gonna get you out!" Through the tiny air vents, terrified whimpers answered him. He dug his gloved fingers along the door's edge, searching for a weakness. The metal groaned in protest, and then a loud metallic clunk. The rear latch budged an inch. Not enough, but enough to give hope. Hayes, in the passenger seat, caught the movement in the side mirror. His perfectly sculpted face twisted into fury. "Get rid of him!" he barked to the driver, a broad man with sunken cheeks and tattoos creeping up his neck. The driver grit his teeth, swerved the truck sharply, trying to fling Ethan off the side. Ethan slammed against the corner, jaw snapping tight, vision spotting. Pain rippled through his ribs, but he refused to fall. Behind them, headlights burst closer, Doyle's SUV making its move. "Now!" Emily yelled. Doyle swung the wheel, clipping the back end of the cargo truck. The force jolted the truck, making it shudder. Ethan used the moment to climb higher, reaching the corner of the roof. Ranger's silhouette emerged in the darkness then, an unstoppable force of fur and loyalty. He sprinted along the roadside ditch, paws pounding through snow. His breath puffed like miniature engines. His growl grew louder, closer, promising he wouldn't lose Ethan again. Emily flung the SUV door open while still moving. "Ranger, go!" The German Shepherd leapt from the car and landed running, accelerating toward the truck with the precision of a missile guided by love. Lydia Marsh, the copper-haired accomplice, leaned out of the following pickup, pistol aimed at Ethan. Her voice cut the storm. "Fall, you stubborn fool!" She fired, sparks flying as a bullet ricocheted off metal inches from Ethan's leg. Before she could fire again, Doyle slammed a fist on the horn, distracting her. King leaned out her window, firing a controlled shot that shattered the pickup's headlight. Lydia shrieked as the pickup lost traction, spinning out and crashing backward into a snowbank. The driver from that vehicle, a lanky man in an oversized tactical coat, fell into the snow, dazed. A police cruiser behind quickly pulled up to apprehend him. But Hayes's truck was still surging forward, engines roaring like a cornered beast. Ethan crawled along the roof, each movement an act of defiance. Ranger reached the rear bumper, launched upward, his claws digging into metal. Ethan grabbed his harness with one hand, nearly sobbing in relief. "Good boy. Hold on." Hayes cursed, slamming his fist into the dashboard. "Do something!" The driver yanked the wheel violently, aiming toward the upcoming narrow bridge where a frozen river churned below. If the truck crashed there, it would be the end. For everyone. Emily stood now through the roof hatch of the SUV, rifle steady despite the bouncing vehicle. She aimed, not at the truck, but at the tires. "Don't miss," Doyle muttered. Emily fired. The rear tire exploded with a deafening pop. The truck skidded, spinning across the ice. Ethan wrapped his arms around Ranger and flattened himself, bracing. The world twisted sideways, metal screaming, glass exploding. The truck slammed into the guardrail, shaking the entire bridge. The engine sputtered and died. Silence, except for the whimpering of dogs inside, and slow footsteps crunching in snow. Emily approached with her weapon raised, boots steady despite her pounding heartbeat. Hayes crawled out, wiping blood from his lip, his polished image now ruined by cold truth. "Don't move," Emily commanded. Hayes stared up at her, wild and cornered. "You don't understand who I am." Ethan limped forward, supporting Ranger. "A man who hurts the innocent," he said, voice low. Hayes lunged toward the bridge rail, desperation driving him to flee into the river rather than face justice. But Ranger launched first, grabbing his coat sleeve and throwing Hayes off balance. Officers King and Brooks seized the moment, rushing in to cuff him. Hayes glared at Ethan as he was dragged away. "You think this ends with me?" Ethan looked at the crates, at fear turning into hope, and replied simply, "Yes." The dogs barked, not in terror now, but in triumph. Emily rushed to Ethan, relief softening her exhaustion. "You're insane," she said, almost laughing. Ethan smirked faintly. "I blame him," he said, scratching Ranger's neck. "He keeps dragging me back into hero work." Ranger wagged his tail once, proud. Officers unlocked the crates, warming trembling paws with blankets. The German Shepherd puppy, Scout, poked his head out and wobbled straight to Ranger, clumsily nuzzling beneath his chin. Ranger licked the pup's ear gently. Ethan's heart swelled. Under the snowfall, on a bridge no longer tied to fear, lives were saved. A fight ended, and hope rose. Dawn crept into Willow Creek with a soft gold light, as if the sun itself wanted to heal what the night had broken. Snow still clung stubbornly to the rooftops, but the air felt different, warmer somehow, touched by relief rather than fear. At the old warehouse that once held cages and terror, police tape fluttered lightly in the breeze. But inside, everything had changed. Where crates once rattled with desperate whimpers, blankets now covered the concrete floor. Volunteers knelt with open arms, their voices gentle, their hearts wide. Ethan Parker stood near the entrance, a small bandage across his eyebrow and bruises blooming along his ribs. He wore a worn green jacket pulled tight against the cold. Exhaustion weighed on him, but the sight before him, so many tails wagging, so many eyes shining again, lifted his shoulders. Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, aging but fearless, walked proudly beside him. His sable coat gleamed, though patches of gray around his muzzle showed years of service and suffering. On his right side limped a tiny companion, Scout, the German shepherd puppy they'd rescued. Timid at first, he now clung close to Ranger like a small shadow full of courage. "They'll be okay," Emily Carter said softly as she joined Ethan's side. She still wore her dark patrol uniform, though her hair, loose now, fell gently along her pale cheeks. Her hazel eyes, usually sharp with focus, brimmed with tired joy. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, for the first time, they will." Sheriff Raymond Doyle strode up next, the deep lines in his weathered face softened by relief. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders and silver at the temples, a figure molded by decades of responsibility. Mistakes from earlier in the case still weighed on him, but today he carried them differently, not as wounds, but lessons. "The truck's evidence will bury Hayes," Doyle said. "Too many lives stolen. Too many lies." Ethan looked toward the hill where snowplows cleared the crashed truck. "And Lydia?" "Already surrendered," Officer King called over as she passed by with a clipboard. Tall and fit with platinum hair tucked into her cap, she managed the ongoing rescue operation like a commander whose strength came from compassion as much as skill. From the parking lot came hurried footsteps. Sarah Whitmore, the 40-year-old shelter volunteer Ethan first met in Chapter 1. She moved with a quiet grace, slightly taller than average, her long chestnut hair pulled into a loose braid. Her warm brown eyes glimmered the moment she saw the dogs. "Oh my goodness! How many are there?" "Over 100, King replied. Sarah knelt instantly among a group of trembling mixed-breed dogs. Her voice turned soft, nurturing. "You're safe, honey. All of you are safe now." Ethan watched her brush a gentle hand along a Dalmatian's back, tears forming on her lashes. He remembered her telling him once that dogs never judged, never abandoned. She had lost a brother to sickness years ago, a loss that left quiet grief living beneath her skin. But here, among these rescued souls, she seemed to breathe lighter. Scout stumbled into her lap, nuzzling for affection like he'd always belonged there. Sarah laughed, wiping her eyes. "Well, aren't you brave?" Ranger sat and let Sarah scratch his neck. Ethan smiled. "He thinks he runs the place." "Maybe he does," she answered, eyes shining at Ethan more than she realized. Ethan's heart jolted unexpectedly. For years, he believed he was better off alone, haunted by a past mission overseas where he'd failed to protect his team and lost his first K-9 partner. But now he wasn't alone. Officer Brooks limped over, proudly carrying a clipboard filled with adoption applications. The young officer, slender, freckles scattered over his nose, looked more confident than he did just a day before when fear shook his voice. "People are already fighting just to adopt these guys," he said, flushing with excitement. "News stations want interviews. Donations are pouring in." Doyle grunted affectionately. "Slow down, son. One miracle at a time." Emily exhaled a long breath and glanced at Ethan. "You should stick around Willow Creek. We could use someone who runs into danger instead of away from it." Ethan chuckled. "That's more Ranger than me." Ranger barked once, as if arguing. Ethan nudged him. "Okay, fine. Both of us." A clearing of throat drew everyone's attention. An older man approached, Dr. Harvey Lang, a new character, veterinarian. In his late 50s, slightly round in the belly from too many forgotten dinners, with thick graying eyebrows and kind ocean blue eyes behind wire spectacles. He wore a tan veterinary coat with paw print pins on the collar. His voice carried a warmth earned through decades of healing. "If any of you can help me set up medical stations, we can start treating the most injured cases immediately." His hands, rough yet gentle, inspected a limping terrier with the tenderness of a father soothing a child. "This little guy will be running again soon," he promised. Volunteers hurried to assist. Officer King, Brooks, and others who had shown up from town. Life surged forward. Hope regained its footing. Ethan took a slow breath, gratitude pressing deep into his chest. He looked down at Scout, the puppy who had survived fear to find family. "How about you?" Ethan asked him quietly. "Want a home?" Scout tilted his head, ears flopping, then barked joyfully and pressed into Ethan's boots. Ranger let out a proud huff, as if he approved the adoption paperwork himself. Laughter spread around them like sunshine. Emily watched the exchange with a tender smile. "Looks like he already chose you." Ethan crouched, resting his forehead against Scout's. "Then I guess we belong here." Not every scar was gone. Not every nightmare would vanish. But the worst had passed, and what remained was enough. A second chance stitched from loyalty, bravery, and love. Volunteers cheered as another group of dogs, tails wagging wildly, were led into warm vans bound for new beginnings. Ranger stood at Ethan's side, gaze steady and noble, a soldier finally able to stand down without fear. Scout yipped, bouncing on clumsy paws, ready to learn how to be a protector. Ethan wrapped an arm around both of them. All around him, Willow Creek rebuilt itself through joy. The sun rose higher, painting the town in promise, and Ethan whispered, mostly to himself but loud enough for Ranger to hear, "We're finally home." Sometimes miracles don't arrive with wings of angels or beams of heavenly light. Sometimes God sends them on 4 paws, covered in snow and scars, reminding us that love can break chains stronger than steel, and hope can be rescued, even from the darkest places. In our everyday lives, we pass by people and animals, carrying silent burdens. A neighbor fighting loneliness, a veteran remembering battles no one sees, a forgotten dog waiting for one gentle hand. And in those moments, God whispers through them, "You are not alone. You are loved. You are worth saving." Tonight, let this story remind us that kindness is a divine mission, that every act of compassion is a prayer, and every rescued soul is a blessing returned. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment Amen if you believe God is still working miracles through ordinary people. Like and subscribe to help more stories of second chances reach the world. May God bless you. May He guard your homes, guide your steps, and fill your days with the loyalty of a faithful friend. Just like Ranger, Scout, and every angel who walks on 4 paws. Amen.